On his first day as an intern at Holloway Reeves Financial Group, every single person Marcus Hale met pulled him aside to give him the exact same warning. Stay away from Vivian Marsh. They said she had fired a senior manager in the middle of a board meeting. They said 3 personal assistants had quit in a single year. They said she could end a career with 1 email and never lose a minute of sleep over it. Marcus kept his head down. He made copies. He checked spreadsheets. He stayed in his lane. But that night, while returning a misfiled folder to the executive floor, he saw her through a half-opened door. Alone. Her back against the wall, a pen in her hand, a contract in front of her that she clearly did not want to sign. When she noticed him, she did not call security. She reached out and caught the sleeve of his jacket. "I hope you don't," she whispered. He did not know if she meant don't tell anyone what you just saw or don't leave. Marcus Hale had spent most of 2 years explaining a gap in his resume to people who had never once had to choose between a job and the person they loved most. He had been a mid-level operations analyst at a logistics company outside Chicago. Steady work, decent pay, a clear path upward. Then his wife Rachel was diagnosed, and none of that mattered anymore. He left, without thinking twice. He walked Nora to school every morning, sat with Rachel through her treatments every afternoon, and learned to stretch a modest savings account further than he ever thought possible. When Rachel died, Nora was 7. Marcus was 32, and he had been out of the professional world long enough that his skills read as outdated on paper, even when they were not. He sent out 46 applications in 14 months. He made it to final interviews for 11 of them. None of them offered him the job. A workforce re-entry program, run out of a community college in downtown Chicago, gave him his next shot. 12 weeks of updated training and data analysis. A placement coordinator who actually returned phone calls. And an internship at a company willing to give second chances to people who had earned their detour. The company was Holloway Reeves, a financial consulting firm that occupied 9 floors of a glass tower on Chicago's North Side, with a client list that included 4 Fortune 500 companies and a reputation Marcus did not fully understand until his first morning. He was 35. The other interns, as far as he could tell, were 22 to 24. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody had to. He was assigned to the analytical support team on the 6th floor under a team lead named Diane Finch. Diane was sharp, organized, and moved through the office with the efficiency of someone who had survived several rounds of internal restructuring by making herself useful to whoever happened to hold the power at the time. She greeted Marcus with a firm handshake and a tour that ended at the copy machine. "You'll mostly be doing data entry and document prep for the first few weeks," she said. "Standard track for interns. Keep your work clean, don't ask questions above your pay grade, and you'll be fine." Marcus nodded. He had made peace with starting at the bottom a long time ago. Nora needed stability, and stability required income, and income required him to swallow whatever pride might have objected to spending his first afternoon formatting expense tables. The warnings started before lunch. A paralegal named Kevin stopped him in the hallway near the elevators. "You're the new intern, right, on Diane's team?" "That's right." Kevin lowered his voice. "You'll hear her name a lot. Vivian Marsh, the CEO." He let the title land for a moment. "My advice, don't try to impress her. Don't hold eye contact too long in group meetings. And whatever you do, don't let her learn your name." "Marcus's name is Marcus," he said. Kevin was already walking away. "Just trust me on this." 2 more people offered variations of the same guidance before the afternoon was over. The details shifted slightly with each telling. One person mentioned a manager who had been fired mid-sentence during a board meeting. Another referenced 3 assistants who had quit in a single calendar year. But the shape of the warning never changed. Vivian Marsh was dangerous not in a way that could be easily explained, but in the way certain workplaces become dangerous once the person at the top has stopped tolerating anything less than exactly what she expects. Diane, when Marcus finally worked up the nerve to ask, was the most direct of all. "Don't try to get her attention," she said, without looking up from her monitor. Don't try to be helpful in a way that crosses department lines. And if she ever asks you something directly, keep your answers short and professional and don't offer anything extra." She finally looked at him. "I'm serious. She has fired people for less." Marcus said he understood. He went back to his desk and said nothing more about it. But he started noticing things, in the quiet way people notice things when they no longer have to pretend to be busy. He noticed the lights on the executive floor were still on at 8 o'clock when the rest of the building had gone nearly dark. He noticed, while sorting a stack of interdepartmental memos, that several proposed benefit cuts, reductions to employee health coverage, changes to parental leave policy, had already been approved by the board and then quietly redirected for review with a single handwritten note. The signature at the bottom read, "V. Marsh." He noticed that the woman everyone described as cold was in at least 2 instances he happened to witness the only person in the building looking out for people less able to look out for themselves. The person who spoke to him without an agenda on that first day was not another intern, and not anyone from his own team. It was Eleanor Price. She appeared at his desk mid-morning with a laminated sheet and a small stack of internal forms. She was 58, with reading glasses pushed up into steel gray hair and the calm of someone who had seen enough office drama to have stopped being surprised by any of it. "Room scheduling," she said, setting the laminated sheet on his desk. "You'll need to log meeting requests through the internal portal, not the shared calendar drive. They don't sync." She showed him the form. "Fill in the code in column B before you submit it, or it gets routed to the wrong department and disappears entirely." "Thank you," Marcus said. "I wouldn't have known that." Eleanor shrugged, unbothered. Nobody tells the new hires anything useful. She looked around the floor with an expression that was neither cynical nor warm, just long familiarity. In this building, people pay more attention to titles than to who's actually doing the work. She said it the way someone comments on the weather. An observation, not a complaint. Marcus thanked her again, and she returned to her own desk on the other side of the floor. He filed the scheduling sheet in his top drawer. He noticed almost in passing that Eleanor's bottom drawer had a small combination lock on it. It was the only locked desk drawer on the entire floor. No one else seemed to think anything of it. He was reviewing a batch of expense reports late that afternoon when he found the error. A transposed figure on a quarterly summary report headed for the executive floor, one that threw off the projection by roughly $40,000. Small enough to miss on a quick read. Large enough to matter. Marcus corrected the figure, added a short note explaining the change, and put the folder back in the outbound stack without saying anything about it. He did not want his first day to look like an attempt to make someone else look careless. He simply fixed it and moved on. He did not think about it again until the next night. He had stayed late to finish a batch of file prep. The executive floor was quiet when he stepped off the elevator to return a misfiled folder. He was reaching for the document wall outside the operations suite when he saw the light on in the main conference room. The door was not fully closed. He heard Preston Wade's voice first, measured, almost pleasant, the voice of a man used to having his patience mistaken for generosity. "The board has reviewed the numbers," he said. "The Wilmot offer is reasonable, given the company's current position. All we need is your signature." The Wilmot offer includes a clause that allows them to lay off 43% of the existing staff within 6 months of the acquisition. The woman's voice was lower but steadier. "I'm not going to sign a document that turns 800 people into a line item. Those are operational decisions that would fall to the new management. I know what they are, Preston." Marcus went very still. Through the gap in the door, he could see a section of the conference table and 2 of the people seated at it. Preston Wade's posture, precise in a silver-gray suit, suggested he rarely sat in a chair that had not already been positioned in his favor. And across from him, Vivian Marsh. She was not what the warnings had prepared him to see. She was contained, yes. Her expression gave away nothing. But what Marcus saw was not coldness. It was the specific stillness of someone who had been in that room in that exact conversation many times before and had learned that visible emotion was the first thing men like Preston used against you. "If you don't sign by the end of the quarter," Preston said, "the board will move to a vote, and I think you already know how that vote turns out." The meeting ended shortly after. Chairs scraped, people gathered their things. Marcus stepped back from the door, reached for the stack of folders in his arms, and misjudged the edge. The papers scattered across the floor with a sound that felt unreasonably loud in the empty hallway. He had picked up most of them when the conference room door swung fully open. Vivian Marsh stood in the doorway. She looked at the papers in his hands. She looked at his face. "How long were you standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to have heard things I shouldn't have," Marcus said. He saw no point pretending otherwise. "I'm not going to repeat any of it. I'm an intern. I have a daughter, and I need this job. I have no interest in your board politics." She studied him. Then her eyes moved to the employee badge clipped to his lanyard. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite warmth. Recognition. "You corrected the projection report today," she said. "The expense summary." "There was a transposition error. I know," he said. "I caught it when the folder came through." She paused. The rest of the team had already signed off on it. Marcus did not answer that. He finished gathering the last of the papers and lined the stack against the wall shelf. When he turned to leave, she shifted just slightly, not blocking his path, but enough that he stopped. Her hand caught the edge of his sleeve. The contact was brief, barely intentional. "I hope you don't," she said. Her voice was low, not quite a demand, not quite a request. Marcus did not ask her to clarify. He was not entirely sure, standing there in that dimly lit hallway, whether she meant "don't tell anyone," or "don't leave," or "don't be like everyone else who eventually decided it was easier to look away." He nodded once and took the stairs back down to the 6th floor. The next morning, Diane assigned him to review a batch of old expense files before they were transferred to cold storage. Routine work, the kind of task given to interns, specifically because it required no judgment and produced no results anyone would ever read. It took Marcus 40 minutes to find the first one. A consulting payment, $340,000, to a firm called Aldrich Advisory Partners. He searched the vendor database. Aldrich had no website, no registered employees, and no address beyond a suite number that, when he looked it up, turned out to be a mailbox rental store at a strip mall outside Naperville. He found 6 more like it before lunch. Different names, different amounts, all approved by the same signature, Gordon Pace, the chief financial officer. He pulled the quarterly summaries and matched the outflows against the revenue reports. The numbers told a story that had nothing to do with any decision Vivian Marsh had ever made. He brought his notes to Diane. She looked at the page for a long moment, then looked up at him with an expression that was not anger, but something closer to fear. "Delete these notes," she said. "Don't save them anywhere. Don't mention this to anyone on the team. Someone else did this. I know how it looks." Her voice dropped lower. "An accountant named Victor Lowe asked the same questions 18 months ago. He was fired for a data security violation 2 weeks later." She pushed the folder back across the desk. "You have a daughter. Please think about that." Marcus took the folder. He thought about Nora. He thought about the 800 employees who would get layoff notices if the Wilmot deal went through. That afternoon, Vivian called him up to the executive floor. She already knew about the payments. She had suspected for months that money was being siphoned out of the company through fraudulent vendor accounts, but Gordon controlled the financial reporting system, which meant every trail she tried to follow led back through him. "You're the only person in this building," she said carefully, "whose access to those files no one will question. You're an intern processing file transfers. You're not a threat to anyone." "Until I am," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. "Until you are." She did not minimize it. He respected her for that. "What are you asking me to do?" "Keep looking," she said. "Document what you find. And don't tell anyone else." He thought about the look on Diane's face when he handed the folder back. He thought about Eleanor's comment about who actually did the work in this building. He thought about a man named Victor he had never met who had asked the same questions and paid for it. Then he said yes. He worked in fragments. During lunch breaks, he spread printouts across the small table in the 6th floor break room and matched invoice numbers against vendor registration records he pulled from public business databases on his phone. In the evenings, before leaving the building, he photographed the room scheduling board outside the main conference suite, something he had started doing as part of an intern assignment, compiling a weekly facilities report that no one ever actually read. He saved the images to a personal cloud folder and did not think much more about it at the time. The pattern was not complicated once you knew what to look for. Every fraudulent consulting firm had been paid within the same 2-week window each quarter. The payments funneled through a subsidiary account that Gordon had restructured 18 months earlier, shortly after the board began discussing the Wilmot acquisition. The amounts were large enough to distort the balance sheet, but small enough individually to avoid automatic audit flags. Someone had thought this through carefully. The problem was that Marcus did not have access to the consolidated financial records that would let him trace where the money actually went after it left Holloway Reeves' accounts. He had fragments. He did not yet have a complete story. What he did have after 2 weeks was a reputation he had not asked for. The other interns had noticed his trips to the executive floor. The visits were not frequent. Vivian was careful about that, but in an office where people tracked proximity to power the way other people tracked the weather, even 2 visits in 10 days was enough. Theories circulated, none of them especially subtle. One version held that he was angling for a permanent position by making himself useful to the CEO in ways that bypassed the standard evaluation process. Another, which he overheard in the elevator, suggested Vivian kept him close because his presence helped the company's optics during a period of outside scrutiny. He let it go. He had learned long before Holloway Reeves that other people's theories about your motives are mostly a reflection of what they themselves would have done in your position. Diane was more direct. "People are talking," she said one Thursday afternoon, when the floor was nearly empty, "and not in ways that are good for you." "I know." She waited until he looked up from his monitor. "I'm not saying this to be cruel. I've seen people try to attach themselves to Vivian before. Smart people, with more resources than you currently have. They all ended up in the same place." She folded her hands on the desk. "You have a daughter. If whatever you think you're building up there isn't worth what it's going to cost you to walk away." She meant it. He could see that she did. Diane Finch was not a cruel person. She was someone who had learned to survive in a specific environment by accepting certain things as fixed, and she was trying, in the only way she knew how, to pass that lesson along. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. She nodded, and neither of them said anything else about it. The following week, Preston Wade called him into his office. The vice president's office sat on the 8th floor, 3 levels above Marcus's team, and noticeably quieter. Preston gestured to the chair across from his desk with the easy authority of a man who had never once doubted the chair would be filled. "Marcus," he said, as if they were old acquaintances, "I wanted to check in personally. A workforce reentry candidate. A single father, a gap in the resume. The whole story that matters to this organization." He smiled the way people smile when the smile is doing work. "How are you finding things so far?" "Fine," Marcus said. "The work is straightforward." Good. Preston set down his pen. "I'll be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty. There are some concerns on my end about how your time has been allocated. The visits to the executive floor, the extended access to certain records." He let that sit for a moment. "I want to make sure no one above your level is putting you in a difficult position. Because if someone were using your position as an intern, your low profile, to get information that would normally require senior clearance, that would put you in a legally dangerous situation." His voice stayed pleasant. "On the other hand, if you came to me directly with any concerns about what you might have seen or heard, I could make sure you were protected, and that a position opened up for you here that actually reflected your real skills." He paused for effect. With a salary to match someone of your experience. Marcus looked at the desk between them. I appreciate the concern, he said. I'm just doing file transfers. There's nothing to report. Preston held the smile a moment longer, then let it drop. The next morning, Marcus's building access was quietly downgraded. His badge now opened the lobby, the 6th floor, and the parking structure. Nothing above the 7th floor registered when he swiped it. No alert was sent, no explanation was given. It was the kind of move that communicated its message precisely because it required no words. He was reassigned as well. His new duties had nothing to do with data managing conference room bookings, restocking supply closets, photocopying documents for the administrative pool. Preston had pulled him out of any position where he might stumble across something useful. What Preston apparently had not considered was the document storage room on the 3rd floor. It was Marcus's job now to sort and log physical records before they were transferred to off-site archiving. He spent 4 days in a windowless room the size of a large closet, working through boxes of paper contracts, vendor agreements, and internal correspondence that had never been digitized. By the end of the 2nd day, he understood why. The paper trail was older than Gordon's restructured accounts. It reached back further, to an earlier and smaller version of the vendor scheme set up by someone who had the authority to approve outside contracts without board sign-off. The signature on those early documents was not Gordon's. It was Preston's. Gordon had not designed the scheme. He had inherited it, expanded it, and been given a large enough cut to guarantee his silence. The entire arrangement had been built by the man now presenting himself as the only responsible adult in the company. Marcus photographed every page that mattered and said nothing to anyone. The moments that changed things between him and Vivian did not happen in the boardroom. They happened in the margins, in the pauses between what needed to be said and what actually got said instead. The first came on a Tuesday night almost 3 weeks in. Marcus was still at his desk at 7 when Vivian passed through the hallway on her way back from a board pre-call. She stopped when she saw the light on. Still here. A few more minutes. She leaned against the doorframe without stepping all the way in. A text notification lit up his phone screen. He had smiled at it before he could stop himself. Who is it, she asked. He turned the phone so she could see it. Nora had written, Dad, do you get free food at your job? Because Yasmin's dad works where the rich people work, and she says they have a whole kitchen. Vivian read it once, then again. Something happened in her expression. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else, more like a wall, lowering by a few inches. We have a kitchen, she asked. You have one on the 9th floor. I've seen it from the elevator. Go home, she said. Take food from the 9th floor kitchen. Tell Nora yes. I can't. I run this company. You can. She had already turned back toward the executive suite. Take enough for 2. He did. And Nora, when she got home, declared it the best dinner they'd had since her birthday. The second moment came on a night when the numbers were not adding up and neither of them had much patience left for careful distance. They had been going through a set of transaction records for over an hour when Marcus set down his pen and said, without really planning to, why don't you just tell them? Vivian looked up. Tell them what? Tell the staff when you make a decision. They don't understand benefit redirects, budget holds. Why not just explain it to them? Half of what they think about you is built on silence. She was quiet long enough that he thought she was not going to answer. The last time I explained a decision directly to someone on my leadership team, she finally said that explanation was in Preston's office within 48 hours. Reframed, stripped of context, used as proof that I was emotionally reactive. She looked back down at the papers in front of her. I'm not cold. I learned that openness in this particular environment is something people pick up and use against you. Marcus did not say anything. He looked at the woman across the table, not the CEO, not the story the building had built around her, and saw someone who had been burned enough times to have decided that keeping her distance was the only way to hold on to anything. He went back to the transaction records. The third moment was quieter than the other two. Vivian asked him a few nights later why he was still doing this. Not why he had said yes in the first place, she understood that answer, but why he was still doing it now, after the reassignment, after Diane's warnings, after Preston's barely veiled offer. He thought about how to answer honestly without making it about her. After my wife died, he said, I spent a long time thinking about the decisions I'd made, whether I'd made the right ones. And what I kept coming back to was that I never regretted the things I did, even when they went badly. The things that stayed with me were the times I knew something was wrong and found a reason not to act. He looked out at the city below the window. I'm not doing this to prove anything. I'm doing it because I know what it feels like when people with more power than you decide something without your consent. I'm not going to watch that happen to 800 people because it's inconvenient for me to stop it. Vivian did not try to talk him out of continuing after that. The all-staff meeting was called with 3 days' notice and no set agenda, which meant everyone understood something significant was about to happen. The main conference space on the 4th floor was full when Preston took the podium. He did not use notes. He spoke for 11 minutes about fiscal responsibility obligations to shareholders and the duty of leadership to make hard calls in hard times. He cited the company's shrinking margins. He referenced the Wilmot offer as a necessary path that responsible management was obligated to seriously consider. Then, with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this part more carefully than the rest, he turned toward Vivian. The numbers don't lie, he said. He said the board had identified a pattern of unilateral decision-making that had cost the company the confidence of its major investors. He said there were questions about how certain internal reviews had been conducted about who had been given access to sensitive data, and about the nature of certain relationships that had developed outside normal professional channels. His eyes moved briefly to the back of the room. Every head in the conference space followed his gaze. Marcus sat in the 3rd row from the back with his visitor badge, the only credential he was now permitted to carry in the building, and felt the full weight of 200 people looking at him at once. Preston let the silence hold exactly as long as it needed to. We have an intern, he said, who has been granted access to high-level financial records, who has been meeting privately with our CEO outside of documented work hours, and whose account has been used to extract sensitive client data. He tilted his head slightly. I'm going to ask that individual to stand up and tell this room in his own words what he was asked to do and by whom. No one moved. Marcus stood. He did not do it because he feared what would happen if he didn't. He did it because staying seated felt like the same choice he had refused to make every night for the last 3 weeks. I've been reviewing expense documentation as part of my filing assignment, he said, clear enough for the people in the back to hear. What I found were payments totaling more than $4 million spread across 11 vendor accounts, none of which have any verifiable business operations. He kept his eyes on the room, not on Preston. All of those payments were approved by the chief financial officer. None of them appear in the consolidated reports the board has been using to evaluate the company's financial position. The room was very quiet. The quarterly losses that have been used to justify this acquisition, Marcus continued, are not the result of any decision made by this company's CEO. Preston recovered quickly. He called the claims unverified and irresponsible. He said the intern had been fed incomplete data by someone with an agenda. He said there would be consequences for anyone who used a company platform to defame senior leadership. The meeting ended without a vote, but something had shifted. Marcus could see it in the way people filed out, not the usual post-meeting shuffle, but something slower, more thoughtful. People asking quiet questions, people glancing at Gordon Pace's empty chair. Diane had not spoken. She had sat 2 rows ahead of Marcus for the entire meeting, eyes fixed on the table, hands folded in her lap. When it ended, she did not look at him, but she did not look at Preston either. She left alone, and for the first time, the weight of her own silence felt different to her than it ever had before. The security alert came the next morning at 9:47. Marcus was called into human resources and told his user account had been flagged for transmitting confidential client files to an outside email address. The timestamp on the transmission was from the night before, 11:43 in the evening. His visitor badge was collected at the front desk. He was escorted from the building by a security officer who looked uncomfortable about it and said nothing. Gordon's office issued a statement to the board within the hour. It included a summary of the transmitted files, a log of Marcus's recent access history, and a formal recommendation that the company pursue legal action for data theft. The reentry program called that afternoon. His funding would be suspended pending the outcome of any disciplinary or legal proceedings. Without it, he could not complete his certification. Without his certification, the placement track closed. He sat in his car in his apartment building's parking lot for a long time after that call. He thought about Nora's school tuition. He thought about the lease renewal he had signed 2 months earlier based on projected income that no longer existed. He thought about the 46 applications and the 14 months before Halloway Reeves, and the particular exhaustion of starting over when starting over is the only option left. That same afternoon, Eleanor's resignation notice hit the HR system. She filed it quietly. No farewell email, no stopping to say goodbye to anyone on the floor. No one checked whether her desk drawer was still locked. Eleanor contacted him that night through a personal email address. She asked if they could meet somewhere that was not the office. They met at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the tower. Eleanor arrived in a coat buttoned to the collar, carrying a paper bag she set on the table between them without explanation. "I need to tell you something," she said, "that I should have told someone a long time ago." She explained it without softening any of it. 18 months earlier, Gordon had brought her into a process she did not fully understand. Logging vendor invoices for firms she had never heard of. Processing payments through an account she was told was a standard operating fund. She had been close to retirement. She nodded along and did what she was told. By the time the scale of it became clear to her, she had not gone to anyone. She had been too afraid of losing the pension she'd spent 30 years building. Instead, she had started making copies. Every invoice, every approval memo with Gordon's signature, every routing instruction. That was what was in the locked drawer. That was what was in the bag. "They're not in the system," she said. "I kept physical copies at home." Marcus looked at the bag without touching it. "Eleanor, I know." She held his gaze. "I know what I did. I know what it cost." She looked at the bag. "But I didn't throw them away." He understood the math of someone who had spent 30 years building something she could not afford to lose. He did not absolve her, and he did not judge her. "I only need one thing from you," he said. "What?" "Don't destroy them." She nodded and kept the bag on the table. She did not take it back. The vote to remove Vivian as CEO was moved up by 8 days. The notice went out on a Friday afternoon. Preston also submitted a set of emails to the board's legal team that appeared to show Vivian directing Marcus to extract specific data sets and forward them to a private server. The emails were forged. 2 of them carried a timestamp from a day when Vivian had been in a documented client meeting in another city, but properly staged fake evidence can hold up just long enough to matter. Vivian was placed on administrative leave pending the formal vote. Marcus received a notice from the company's legal department. They were suing him for data theft, breach of contract, and tortious interference. He told Nora that night there had been some trouble at work. She was 10 and she knew he was leaving something out, but she let it go until they were watching television and she curled against him on the couch and said, "It's about the lady at your job." "The boss lady," he said. "Everybody at your work said she was scary." "She really is." He thought of the 9th floor kitchen, of the handwritten note, redirecting benefit cuts, of the woman who had stayed in a building full of people who had already decided who she was and kept showing up anyway. He did not say, "No, she isn't." Nora considered this. "Okay," she said, which was what she said when she believed him, but had not finished thinking something through. The next morning, Vivian asked him to meet at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the tower. She arrived before him carrying a folder. Inside was a letter on pre-signed company letterhead stating that Marcus Hale had acted solely under the direction of the CEO, that all data access had been authorized by her office, and that any legal liability arising from his actions should be directed to her personally. "Sign the acknowledgement on the back," she said. "It clears you from the civil suit." He looked at the letter, then at her. "And you," he said, "that's not your problem to solve, Marcus." Her voice was controlled as always, but something underneath it was not. "You're a father. You are not allowed to lose everything over a fight that was mine before you ever walked through that building's front door." "I didn't stay for you," he said. "I know." "Then you know I'm not signing this." He slid the folder back across the table. She looked through the window at the building down the street, the lit windows on the 6th floor, people moving behind the glass. "When's the vote?" he asked. "Thursday." 4 days. He nodded, drank his coffee, and did not touch the folder again. That night, Diane sat alone in her apartment looking at a document she had kept in a personal folder for 3 years. A list of names, dates, and outcomes compiled during a period when she had been responsible for internal HR transfers. 11 employees, all flagged for asking the wrong questions, all quietly transferred or let go within months. She had kept it because some part of her even then had known. She opened her laptop and wrote a short message to Marcus's personal email. She did not attach the document yet. She only wrote, "I think I have something. I'm not sure it matters. Tell me if it does." 3 floors above her apartment, Preston Wade was prepping remarks for a board vote he believed he had already won. He had not yet thought about the room's scheduling records. Marcus found the sheet at the bottom of his bag on Wednesday morning while looking for a phone charger. The laminated room scheduling sheet Eleanor had given him on his first day, the one he had kept in his top drawer and then without thinking shoved into his bag when security walked him out. He almost set it aside. Then he looked at it. The sheet listed every conference room booking for a 4-week period. He had looked at this document before, in a different context, with different questions. Now he looked at it with the 11 vendor names he had memorized from the 3rd-floor storage room sitting at the front of his mind. Aldrich Advisory Partners, Cornerstone Meridian LLC, Vantage Point Consulting Group. He went through the sheet line by line. Every one of them had booked rooms at Halloway Reeves conference rooms, meeting spaces. 1 reservation for the executive dining suite, dates spread across 14 months. Hours logged in the facility's system as billable meetings with outside clients. There were no visitors' sign-ins recorded at the front desk on any of those dates. He knew this because logging visitor credentials was something interns did, and he had done it enough times to know what the records were supposed to look like. Someone had used the room booking system to build a paper trail of meetings that never happened, generating documentation that made the consulting relationships look operational. The person who had made each of those bookings was logged in the system under their employee ID. He matched the ID against the internal directory. It belonged to Gordon's executive assistant. Marcus then opened every photograph he had taken of the room scheduling board during his weeks in facilities. The photos were time-stamped, geotagged, and stored in a personal cloud folder, not a company account. Gordon had never been able to touch them. In the background of one photo, a storage reference code was visible on a filing cabinet behind the schedule board. He had seen that code before, in the 3rd-floor storage room. It corresponded to a physical filing cabinet holding records from before digitization, from before Gordon's restructuring, records that could not be reached through any electronic system. He called Eleanor. She picked up on the second ring. "The bag," he said. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at my sister's," she said. "I have all of it. I need you to meet me tomorrow morning. Bring everything, including anything with Preston's name on it." A pause. "The vote is tomorrow afternoon." "I know." A longer pause. He did not rush her. "My pension," she said, not as an objection, but as if she were setting it down somewhere so she could move without it for a moment. "I know," he said. 30 years, she said. "Do you understand what that is?" "Yes." The line stayed quiet. Then she said there's a coffee shop called Arlo's, 6 blocks east of the building. I'll be there at 8. He called Diane an hour before he was supposed to meet Eleanor. The document you mentioned, he said. The names and dates. 11 people, she said, over more than 3 years, all flagged for asking questions about expenses or vendor contracts. All transferred or fired within 90 days. That's a pattern of suppression, yes. Her voice was flat in the way voices get when a person has been sitting with a hard truth for a long time. I knew it when I saved it. Will you bring it tomorrow? She was quiet. Diane, he said, I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to bring a document that already exists, that you already saved, to a meeting where it might stop 800 people from losing their jobs. And if it goes badly, it goes badly, but you'll have done what needed to be done regardless. He arrived at the coffee shop at 8:15. Eleanor was already there. The three of them sat in a corner, and Marcus spread out what he had across the table: the photographs, the laminated scheduling sheet, the storage reference code, a timeline he had reconstructed from everything he had gathered over the last 6 weeks. Eleanor added the physical documents from her bag: invoices with routing stamps, approval memos with Gordon's signature. At the bottom of the pile, 3 older documents with a different signature. Preston Wade's name on vendor authorization forms dated 4 years before Gordon ever joined the scheme. Diane set her folder down last. 11 names, 11 timelines, clear-dated, factual. Is it enough? Eleanor asked. Marcus looked at the table. It's enough to stop the vote, he said. Whether it's enough to end it is somebody else's job. He looked at both of them. We need a lawyer in that room. The legal counsel with the reentry program had given Marcus her direct number 3 months earlier during orientation as part of a standard whistleblower resource packet he had filed in a drawer and forgotten about. He called her at 8:45. She was in her car by 9. The vote was scheduled for 2 o'clock on the 14th floor. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the building and looked out over the city with the particular authority of a space designed to remind everyone inside it exactly how far they were from the ground. The table sat 22. 18 board members were present. Vivian sat at the far end of the table, separated from the main body of the meeting by procedural distinction. She could observe, she could speak once, but she could not vote. Preston opened the session by thanking everyone for their time. He spoke about the Wilmont offer, the timeline, the projected recovery for shareholders. He spoke about the responsibility of leadership and the cost of continued uncertainty. When he opened the floor for final comments before the vote, Vivian stood. She used no notes. She walked the board through the 4 years she had served as CEO, the decisions she had made, the reasoning behind them, and what had actually happened to the company's core business as a result. She showed them the transfers from her own account, documented, time-stamped, audited money she had used to preserve employee benefits the board had voted to cut. Preston let her finish. Then he said with the patience who already believed he had won, "Admirable, but sentiment isn't a financial strategy, and the board's obligation is to its shareholders." He called for the vote. The door opened. Marcus walked in first, then Eleanor, with the paper bag pressed against her chest, then Diane with her folder, then the legal counsel with a briefcase and the quiet authority of someone who had spent a career in rooms where she was not entirely welcome. Preston looked at them with the expression of a man recalculating a problem he thought he had already solved. "This is a closed session," he said. A whistleblower protection filing was submitted to the State Attorney General's office at 11:15 this morning, the legal counsel said. Under the law, any material evidence submitted alongside that complaint is admissible in proceedings directly related to the conduct described. This qualifies. Elena set the paper bag on the end of the table. She looked at the board members she had made coffee for and booked rooms for over 3 decades and began to speak. She was methodical. She had organized the documents herself the night before, in the order that told the story most clearly, invoice by invoice, signature by signature, routing instruction by routing instruction. When she finished, she sat down. Marcus stepped forward. He walked the board through the connection, the room bookings, the vendor names, the missing visitor logs, and the storage reference that led to the physical archive carrying Preston's signature, establishing the original scheme 4 years before Gordon was ever brought in to expand it. Then he showed them the transmission log the data supposedly sent from his account to an outside server. He showed them the timestamp, 11:43 at night. Then he showed them his badge deactivation record. His access had been downgraded to restricted at 2:17 in the afternoon that same day, more than 9 hours before the transmission supposedly occurred. A badge, locked out of every system above the 7th floor, could not have been used to access, retrieve, or transmit high-level financial records from the executive database. Then he showed them camera footage pulled that morning from the building's management company, which was not under Gordon's control, of Gordon's assistant, using a terminal in the intern workspace at 11:31 that same night. Diane placed her document on the table last. 11 employees, she said, over 36 months. Each one flagged internally for raising concerns about vendor payments or expense discrepancies. Each one transferred or fired within 90 days. She kept her voice steady. This isn't a coincidence. This is a system. The room was very quiet. One board member, a woman in her 60s, who had said nothing since the session opened, looked at Preston Wade and asked, without raising her voice, whether he'd like to respond. Preston did not answer. The vote did not happen that afternoon. The session was suspended pending an emergency review. Preston and Gordon were placed on immediate administrative leave. The evidence package was forwarded to the State Attorney General's office and within 10 days to federal investigators. The charges, when they came, were substantial. Securities fraud, wire fraud, falsification of business records, obstruction, witness intimidation, the kind of list that takes years to fully resolve and does not resolve quietly. Vivian was reinstated as CEO by a board vote of 16-2 2 days after the session was suspended. It was as close to unanimous as it gets in a room like that. The company's legal team dropped the civil suit against Marcus Hale the following morning. His standing with the reentry program was restored. The program coordinator called him personally and offered an accelerated path to a management track placement citing exceptional circumstances. He thanked her and declined. I want to be evaluated the same way as everyone else, he said. If I qualify for something, I want to have earned it. She paused. Then she said she respected that. After a standard evaluation process, Marcus was offered a position as a junior risk analyst at Halloway Reeves. The offer came from the hiring committee, not from the CEO's office. The committee noted in its written evaluation that his filing work had identified a structural gap in the company's vendor verification process that the entire finance department had overlooked. He accepted the position. Eleanor came back to the office one Monday to find a letter waiting for her. Her pension was fully guaranteed. She had also been offered a newly created advisory role supporting a whistleblower protection initiative Vivian had begun building during her weeks on leave. Eleanor read the letter twice, folded it, and put it in the top unlocked drawer of her desk. She left the bottom drawer locked, old habit. She saw no reason to change it. Diane was neither reprimanded nor celebrated. Vivian met with her privately for 40 minutes 3 weeks after the reinstatement. What they said to each other was not shared with anyone else. What came after was that Diane requested a transfer to a newly formed Internal Compliance Review Committee, a body with real authority designed to make sure what happened at Halloway Reeves could not happen again without someone saying something. She was not sure she was ready for it. She took the position anyway. 6 months later, Marcus completed his certification, passed his evaluations, and formally joined Halloway Reeves. The welcome reception for the new class was held on the 4th floor, the same space where Preston had once stood at a podium and pointed to the back of the room. The chairs were arranged differently now, and the lighting was better, and the people moving through it seemed less cautious than Marcus remembered. Nora came. She wore the jacket she had asked for as a birthday gift because she had explained that almost 11 was when you started needing a jacket. She stood next to her father and looked around the building with the frank assessment of a kid measuring a place against the story she had been told about it. She knew the full version, or as much of it as was appropriate for someone who was nearly 11. She knew her father had started at the bottom and had been told to stay there. She knew he hadn't. Vivian arrived without announcement. She did not head to the front of the room. She moved along the perimeter, spoke briefly with Eleanor near the coffee station, then found the row of chairs reserved for family and guests, and sat down. Nora looked at her. "You're the CEO," she said. "I am. Everybody at my dad's work used to say you were scary." Vivian considered this. What do they say now? Nora looked across the room at her father, talking with two colleagues, relaxed in a way she had not seen him be in a professional setting before. As if the space fit him, instead of the other way around. "He doesn't talk about you like a boss anymore," Nora said, with the precision of someone who had not yet learned to soften her observations. "He just talks about you like a person." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I'll take that," she said. After the reception, Marcus found her in the boardroom on the executive floor, the one with the half-open door, where all of it had started. She was standing by the window looking out at the city. "Do you remember what they told you?" she asked when she heard him come in, "on your first day?" "Not to let me learn your name." And yet he said, and yet she agreed. She turned from the window. The city was dark behind her, and the room was lit from the hallway, and in that light she looked like someone who had stopped performing composure and found something quieter underneath it. "The night I said it," she said in the hallway, "I hope you don't. I wasn't only talking about the secret, I know. I was talking about, I know Marcus." She looked at him steadily. "Everyone who stayed eventually left, not because I pushed them away, but because it was easier to believe the version of me the building had decided on." She paused. "You never seemed to believe it. The version they described never matched the person I kept seeing." She stepped toward him without closing the distance completely, just enough. "I hope you don't leave," she said quietly, directly, with no more ambiguity. Marcus reached out and took her hand. He did not make a promise that stretched beyond the truth of the moment, because he had learned, with some difficulty, that the only promises worth making were the ones you could actually keep. "I'm still here," he said. Nora waited in the hallway outside, jacket on, patient in the way she had learned to be patient. When the door opened and her father stepped out beside the woman who wasn't scary and wasn't just a boss, Nora looked at them both and decided privately that her father had made good choices. She had always suspected he would. She took his hand and the three of them walked toward the elevator, and the building hummed around them with all its ordinary life. The ordinary lives of 800 people continued. It turned out exactly as it should have. Marcus started at the bottom. He had a gap in his resume, a daughter who depended on him, and a building full of people telling him to keep his head down. He didn't rescue anyone with power or connections. He simply noticed what other people walked past. He chose honesty when silence would have been safer, and he refused to leave when leaving would have been easier. No position is too low for an honest person to make a difference. And sometimes the people everyone warns you to stay away from are the ones who most need someone to actually see them clearly. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who is starting over, with someone who has been told they don't belong, or with someone who has stayed quiet for far too long. We tell stories about ordinary people who chose to do the hard, decent thing. We believe those stories deserve to be told.